Okay, everybody. Hello. Order. Order. Thanks, everyone, for coming to today's Spotlight Series session. We're in for a real treat today. We have Gary White with us, the CEO and co-founder of Water.org, with his partner, Matt Damon, who you heard from this morning in the morning session. Gary's a distinguished leader. He's also a UNC alum. He this last year received one of our Distinguished Alumni Awards, which many other distinguished individuals have won. I heard this morning from Greg Allgood, who was another one, that Andy Griffith was also a recipient of this award, which is quite cool. I'll let him be introduced by his interviewer, Don Loria. Don Loria is one of our most distinguished professors in the Department of Environmental Sciences and Engineering. Now emeritus, Don had a long and illustrious career at the intersection of development and infrastructure, and trained many, many students, both domestic and international students in our program. And we're very proud of his legacy. And they're going to be talking to you today about Gary's journey, the Water.org model, and what's on the horizon. And I'll save the content as a surprise. It's going to be great. After they talk, or when they've decided that it's time, there will be Q&A from the audience, and there's a microphone set up here in the central aisle. When the spirit takes you, please stand up and go to the microphone and ask questions. We have this session until 3 o'clock, so there's plenty of time. And knowing these two, I'm sure that they will use it very productively. So you're welcome to the stage. Please come up, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. I've been told that audiences like the folks who are here for this for these sessions have represented more than 100 different countries, more than 200 different universities. I'm just absolutely delighted to see so many folks coming to Chapel Hill and to UNC. My name is Don Loria. I practiced water and sanitation engineering in the US for the first 10 years of my career. That was followed by 45 more years after I joined the UNC faculty to mainly work on problems in developing countries. Gary White and I have been friends and colleagues since the 1990s. Our work has been to serve the poorest people with safe and affordable drinking water. For the next 50 minutes or so, we'll talk about Gary's work during mostly the past 35 years. After that, we'll open the discussion for questions. Gary's work has made enormous improvements in the lives of millions of people around the world. It has had global impacts on the ways both governments and financial institutions handle difficult drinking water problems. Gary has won numerous awards for his work. 30 or 40 years ago, the basic drinking water needs of the poorest people were mainly met by purchasing it from private vendors or getting water from natural sources like rivers and lakes. Today, a radically different situation exists. In the first several years of his career, Gary and co-workers raised donations for providing safe water that improved the lives of about 500,000 people. Then, with the help of Matt Damon, they both shifted their careers so that in the next 30 years, 80 million people. 80 million lives were improved by their work. Gary has helped governments and the global finance industry to see that loans made to poor people have surprisingly been repaid, that water revenues from users have increased, and that both lenders and borrowers now enjoy a win-win situation. So with those introductory remarks, I'll sit down, and what I've done is, and Gary and I have talked about this together, some of you may or may not know that he and Matt Damon co-authored a book entitled The Worth of Water. And I sat down and rather systematically went through his career and selected 5 different topics that he and I will present for discussion this afternoon. So with that, I think I'm going to join Gary over here, and I'll lead off with the first of those topics. So Gary, you've seen this before, but to put it all within context, let's start with your early career in Honduras. Please tell us how you helped small communities of poor people get drinking water from simple pipe systems instead of having to get it from polluted lakes and rivers and expensive water vendors. Tell us how you brought a group of UNC graduate students with you on a trip to Tegucigalpa to investigate the effectiveness of public water taps, only to learn that the water from them was free, but frequently unavailable. How girls and women were the main water collectors, which consumed enormous amounts of their time and energy. How the small amounts of water they collected with each trip were often of questionable quality. How you labeled the wasted time and effort of the water collectors. You labeled that coping costs because of the small payoffs that resulted from so much effort that went into their work. So with that, ball's in your court.
Thanks, Don, and thanks for being here. It is great to be back at UNC, and this conference is really a great testament to the university and the commitment to water, both here in the U.S., North Carolina, and around the world. And so I always love to get back in this conference, and the people that you encounter here give a lot of hope for water supply and sanitation, both within the U.S. and around the world. I feel very fortunate to be partnering with Don on this. I think one of the more well-researched interviewers I've had, so that's good to see. And going all the way back to when Don was advising me on my master's thesis, which really was focused on Honduras. And I think just to kind of to set the stage for this a bit in terms of my response to your question, is that we look at access to water and sanitation around the world, and historically through kind of a philanthropic lens, that we see this as a really kind of a subsidy charity problem to be solved, and there is room for charity and philanthropy in this. But the key to solving this, which is a $1.5 trillion problem, has to come from the perspective of seeing it as an opportunity to bring in private capital markets, which is kind of our point of departure for what we're doing at water.org, is being able to find ways that create value for people who need water so that they can get access to the financing that they need to obtain safe water supplies. So putting this all the way back in the context of my master's research in Tegucigalpa, where a lot of this kind of awareness started to kind of percolate with me, and that was seeing how much time people spend collecting water. Even when there was a public standpost system there in Tegucigalpa, you know, women were having to spend hours every day walking to get to the standpost, but more importantly, waiting in line for the water to come. Sometimes it would come and sometimes it wouldn't. And so what you could see if you kind of peel back the layers is all that time was wasted. It could have been spent toward more productive activities if people had had a connection in their home or a more reliable system. And so when you look at the fact that today everyone in the world who woke up today got water somewhere, right? The question is, how did they pay for that? They pay for it in terms of their time, if they're walking to get water, having uncertainty in their day as to how long it's going to take to get the water. Uncertainty in the day translates into not being able to hold a stable paying job. It translates into health cost, which is another element of the coping cost that goes along with this crisis. And then in terms of cash. So a lot of people buying water from water vendors in urban areas are paying huge amounts. Sometimes, you know, my research in Tegucigalpa showed that they were paying up to 25% of their income to secure water from these vendors. And so the idea is, like, if you see the poor not necessarily as a charity problem to be solved, but as a market to be served, it starts to liberate you to think of this in whole new ways in terms of matching the magnitude of our solutions to this crisis to the magnitude of the crisis. And philanthropy can be used catalytically to help correct these market failures, but we're really going to need to drive in more capital into the market if we're going to do this, and do this in a way that serves both people living in poverty with access to affordable loans to get the solutions that they want, that also satisfies the need for financial returns for investors. And so to me, this journey, you know, originated in Tegucigalpa doing this work, and I think that the concept of always looking for new solutions, new innovations, came from that and was rooted in that work to say, what if these people who are spending so much on water had different opportunities other than just waiting for charity to come along and solve their problem?
Yeah. Gary, I'll tell you some of the thoughts running through my head. And I made reference to bringing a bunch of your fellow students down to Tegucigalpa. And what strikes me in the remarks you just made is that your professional life has been so driven by experience and not necessarily by concepts or ideas that come from other people or books or whatever. You've led a life of experience, and you guys got yourself up maybe in the middle of the night because the word went out to local people, hey, the water's coming, the water's coming. You guys so sat and watched at the most inopportune times of the day to see how many people queue up and how long the water lasts. So you can't find information in the literature on how frequently or infrequently the water may get to the public taps in capital cities and on the fringes. And that's what Gary has done with his life, it seems to me, that you have your knowledge firsthand, and you've devoted, well, I was saying at lunchtime, Gary, we talked about you are not a multitasker. You have to look at these problems when you get into developing countries, to take note of them, to look below just the superficiality of, okay, poor people in capital cities don't have easy access to water. And frequently in the literature, that's as far as it goes. But I think your entire career has been devoted to, let's dig into the weeds. Let's find out what's going on. How can we improve the lives of these poor people? And that's what edifies me, Gary.
Yeah, I think that, you know, kind of immersing yourself in the problem is a really great way to understand it from the inside out, and to, you know, to question the conventional wisdom. And I think, you know, that experience in Tegucigalpa with a bunch of other graduate students to collect that data and do that research was, you know, very eye-opening for me. And I think that experiential aspect of it versus the academic aspect of it too, that, you know, I know I struggled a long time to finish up my thesis, you know, at your behest after coming back, because there was so much to focus on with launching a nonprofit. This is like, you know, I was back in graduate school, just had a daughter for the first child, and was starting a nonprofit. And then on the sideline, I was accountable to Don for my thesis. So it took a little bit longer than any of us anticipated. But I think that's kind of what drives innovation, and what drives, you know, that the curiosity to kind of get out into the field and see what's happening there, understand it from different perspectives. But even that, it doesn't solve the problem, right? The concept of, you know, having an insight that, like, the poor are paying for water, and if you could just get them access to financing, they could probably know better than anybody what their water solution would be. That still took a long, challenging time to understand. How do you get financing to people in those conditions? We didn't want to become a bank ourselves and go out and start lending to poor households for water and sanitation. But again, this is where partnership comes in, understanding that there was this concept of microfinance that already existed, and how do we then use our philanthropic capital to kind of nudge the market towards people who need loans for water and sanitation. And we had a lot of doors slammed in our face, particularly starting in India, trying to convince or compel microfinance banks to start lending for toilets and water connections and rainwater harvesting pumps, whatever was needed. And that's, you know, was a reality, because we saw the market, but they're like, no, we make loans for sewing machines. Because a woman can get a loan for a sewing machine, she can have cash flow by the end of the week, or a cow, because she can be selling milk by the end of the week and have cash flow. And they're like, there's no way we're going to make loans for toilets and water services, because we just don't understand that as a business. And so that's where we had to kind of, lean in with that philanthropic capital to help de-risk this for them, to help them do market research to understand that their clients would take out these loans and repay them. And so that concept of partnering with this really whole dimension of finance at the household level to nudge them towards this is kind of what we saw as the vehicle. And so that, if you fast forward now, we have over 200 financial partners around the world who, because we have worked and nudged them and de-risked this for them, that they will now make loans to poor households for water and sanitation. And those loans are repaid at a rate of 98%, and about 85% of those borrowers are women. And so what this does is it puts an option in front of them to say, yeah, you might wait years or decades for a charity to come along and provide water for free, but you also have the option to take out a loan if that's going to work for you. And no one's ever taken out a loan for something that they don't want. And so this also leads to greater sustainability in terms of the water solutions that are out there. So the idea of, yes, insights are important, curiosity is important, but then really, rolling up your sleeves and getting the right pieces in place for this whole financial puzzle is something that, it takes time.
Yeah. A couple of thoughts running through my mind, Gary. Recently, I reread your master's thesis. I was on the faculty.
You're one of those two people who read it.
Yeah, it was amazing. I was on the faculty, for 45 years. We only had master's and doctoral students, and Gary's, I think, may be the only thesis to which I made absolutely no contribution. Absolutely. So
You got me the funding to go to Honduras.
So Gary and Marla, while they were students, they're putting together their dog and pony show, and they wanted to create a group of advisors. So they turned to some of the faculty. I think that there may have been 5 or 6 of us, I don't know. Dan Oaken, the chair of the department, was on it. I was on it. But people pretty knowledgeable that had been in the academic business for a long time. And I remember Dan Oaken asking you, Gary, what's going to set your business apart from any others? Do you remember the question?
Yes, yes.
And it was a great question. It was, okay, so are you going to be dependent on what you've read in the literature, what others are telling you to do? So, and you handled that great. Let's move on. Okay. Pardon me? It's a secret. You guys want to come up and, if Gary doesn't need the money, give me $10 and I'll answer your question.
We'll get to it. Okay.
So, I on the sheet of paper, I gave a fair amount of thought of this. In my bag down there, I brought Gary's book, The Worth of Water, and I systematically went through it, starting, I don't know, maybe more than a week ago, and I thought that I would raise some issues in chronological order. So, and he dealt with the first one, obviously. When you kicked the focus of your work up a notch from helping poor households get water from public taps, natural sources, and outrageously expensive private vendors. Your work seems to have switched to the more challenging problem of how the poor in cities get water by connecting their dwellings to reliable water systems without having to pay fees they can't afford. How was that change made? It seems the focus was no longer on the water users as it was on the financial investment companies that make loans to borrowers.
Yeah, it was a combination, right? Because a lot of these financial institutions that had these clients that were taking out loans for other things, small business and things, just weren't seeing within that client the potential to make a water or sanitation loan. And so we had to work to kind of translate what we knew was that demand into basically products and services for these financial institutions and help them understand, what is a good loan to make to somebody for a water solution. So things that aren't going to break down or fall apart, helping get them connected to reliable kind of service providers, masons to build toilets and things like that. So it was truly a partnership with these financial institutions to kind of get them on board with this. So we were kind of at that nexus between water and sanitation services and then finance. And so that's really what it took to kind of nudge this whole system into motion so that these financial institutions would start making these loans and so that they would be repaid, because that was critical to this as well, because that was their doubt. So the good thing about this is when it started to catch on, we had to do less evangelizing, and a lot of these financial partners would start doing that for us. So then we started hosting these convenings around the world where our partners who were in this program would come together and basically present to other financial institutions to kind of help to spur that and to make it grow. And I think that's the beauty of this too, because once you get these financial institutions engaged, they start thinking about how to iterate the program. And so now a lot of these financial partners are not just making loans at the household level, but they're also making loans to entrepreneurs who are launching water and sanitation businesses and enterprises. So that's key to this as well. They're now making loans to small communities to expand their networks into new neighborhoods, to put in new wells and new tanks. And so the once you kind of shine a light on this market, and the tremendous coping costs that poor people bear in order to get water and sanitation every day, it becomes kind of a no-brainer. And just one, quick example, and I think I mentioned this in the book, a woman in the Philippines, in a slum outside of Manila, her name was Lenadiza. She was paying one of these water vendors $2 a day to get water for her family, so basically $60 a month. But she didn't have what would have been about a $300 fee to pay to connect to the utility and to do the plumbing to her house. So she could be, paying $2 every day, but she didn't have that capital expenditure savings there to do that. And so she took out a loan from one of our financial partners and then got that water connection. And her loan payments were about $5 a month for 2 years. And her water tariff to the water company was about $5 a month. So you can see right there going from $60 a month to $10 a month. This is the real shame in this whole failure that we have with this global water crisis, is that there's already enough money sloshing around in these coping costs, over $300 billion a year. That money's in the system kind of sloshing around very ineffectively. And you see this whenever you travel to a low-income country. Just look up on the roofs. Every roof has one of these plastic water tanks. Each one of those tanks has an electric pump that's pumping water, because when the water comes once a day or once a week, everybody pumps it. And all of those costs are unnecessary if you have a reliable water system. So these coping costs are so massive in this whole system that what we're trying to do is just get some of those coping costs redirected. And in Larisa's case, it was just $50 a month that got redirected in a way that allows her to take that capital and go on and do whatever she can do with that $50 a month to improve the life of her family, to start her own business, to do whatever she wants to do. And so I think that's the good news and the sad news about this whole global water crisis, is the problem really contains its own solution. If you can just make the capital move around in new directions and make it capital affordable.
Yeah. Interesting, Gary. Years ago, before you and Matt wrote your book, what struck me as the heart of your work, the work you were doing with investment companies, you didn't just now mention it or describe it, it seems to me, in explicit terms, and it's this, what I took away from it. If you go and look at the literature of lending institutions, Gary is not the first one to be able to convince lenders that they should be loaning money to very poor people. Lots of different companies have been doing that, actually, for some decades. I've looked at that literature. There's a piece of my career that's interested in economics, and lenders have been making loans to very, very poor people in developing countries for a long time. But almost without exception, or maybe absolutely without exception, they made loans to people who needed the money to open a business. Oh, okay, what's so important about a business? Well, if you open a business, then you're going to have customers that are going to buy something from you, which means that the borrower has income from those customers, and that income then can get used to pay for the loan that the borrower has just transacted. Now let's think about water supply. The customers who get a loan to be able to connect to a piped water supply system, they don't generate any income that flows back to the lender. So it's a gigantic act of faith, it seems to me, on the part of lenders that are willing to take the risk that we're going to lend to these individual households who desperately need water, and we don't know that they're ever going to be able to repay the loans because they're not in the business of selling something that generates income. I don't find that explicitly, and I think it's right at the heart of your uniqueness and what you guys did for a living. I don't know anybody who has done this, Gary.
Yeah, I think it is just getting out there and understanding the problem from the ground up, and understanding that yes, it wasn't a business that allowed them to generate the income to repay that loan, which is the conventional wisdom. It's income enhancing, right? So if they're not paying that water vendor, or if they're not walking hours every day, they're converting that into a paid job, and that the fact that the value creation is so immense. Like I said, if everybody got water today somewhere, and they're paying huge amounts for it, if you give them an off-ramp to have a loan to kind of substitute that lost money that they're spending at the vendor, or the time, or the health, then they're gonna take it. And so it's, we were convinced, and there's other things too that contribute to this. I met women who were paying loan sharks 125% interest so that they could build a toilet, right? And so the evidence was kind of out there in the market if you went out and figured it out. But it's how do you connect those financial dots to people who are skeptics, who have the money to loan, to convince them that this is a good deal. And I think that's where you have to come in and put skin in the game. You have to take risk, and that's what we did with the first financial institutions. We said, look, if these loans don't work out, we're going to make you whole. And that's what it took to kind of jumpstart the market and to kind of get the whole ball rolling. I think we also didn't stop at that, right, too, as we worked with these partners. I remember, Matt and I were in India, like in 2014, 2015, something like that. We were riding around in a Jeep, meeting with all these different financial partners that we had kind of nudged toward this, and we're like, what's going to prevent you from doing this even at a larger scale? And they said, well, we need more consistent access to wholesale capital at affordable rates so that we can kind of scale up these portfolios that we've developed. And then that was where, this was about the time that social impact investing was really starting to come into its own. And so the concept that if we could create a fund that would allow us to raise capital in the US and then bring more wholesale capital into the equation, then these partners seem to be willing to take us up on that. So we Matt said, I'll put in the first $1 million, we'll create a fund. We raised about another $10 million, and then we went and got into the business of being a financial institution through a nonprofit organization. So that experiment worked out. At that point, I think we got our investors like 1%. Bank of America came into that initial fund and helped us out with that. Other partners came in, high net worth individuals, the Hilton Foundation and others. But that then proved that there was the ability to start to connect the capital markets, albeit at a very low rate of return, to people who need water. And that then spurred us to actually set up a whole new legal entity. So we now have WaterEquity, which is a registered investment advisor with the Securities and Exchange Commission that raises debt and equity capital and provides financial returns to investors, much more than 1% now, but getting up to rates that we think are competitive. And so the concept that we're really after is creating what I call the financial plumbing now that's necessary to connect the global capital markets at competitive financial returns with the Lena Reeses of the world who need a $300 loan. And so that's really what WaterEquity is doing. We've raised over $500 million in committed capital now across multiple funds. It's actually creating that, not only the plumbing, but also the money that needs to flow through it, so that people can get access to loans that are good for them, and so that the investors can also get financial returns that are competitive for them. And we also see this within our corporate partners. We now have Starbucks and Microsoft, Ecolab, Caterpillar. They're all using their balance sheets now to invest in these funds so that they can get financial returns, and so that they can also meet their social and CSR goals with this while also making that happen. Some of those are actually choosing to donate their returns back into water.org so that we can continue to build the investment pipeline for more deals.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the business that we're in now,
Right.
is like, how do we continue to scale this up?
Right, great. Okay, moving on. Once you started working with financial lending institutions, an important task you faced required explaining to them how their loans could produce multiple outcomes. Their loans would not be limited to just making a profit. They would produce large social improvements as well. I assume it took a while to successfully get that message across to lenders. I think the Bank of America might have been the first one to give your proposal a try. Tell us how you did it, how Bank of America bought the idea that social improvements could result from sacrificing only a small fraction of their profit.
Well, I think
Good luck.
It was kind of a perfect storm of sorts, right? So we were doing this at a time when, corporate social responsibility was really coming to the fore. You saw a lot of global corporations wanting to have that positive impact. That has kind of morphed into ESG. And so a lot of companies were setting targets and continuing to do that. A lot of them are setting targets around water neutrality as well. So that feeds into this quite a bit, as some of the corporations that are investing also have taken pledges to be water positive or water neutral. So there's this confluence of that, the confluence of social impact investing as kind of a domain really taking off, so we could work within that slipstream a little bit. And, we built, a clear body of evidence. We had hundreds, of these financial partners that were out there making these loans, getting them repaid, having impact, having sustainability. So we had an underlying asset, if you will, of millions of microloans out there that were being made, that were being repaid at a high rate. You go talk to a banker or investor, and you demonstrate that underlying asset and the value that's being created for those individuals, and then they start to kind of come on board and say, yes, this ticks a lot of boxes for us. You've actually created a stable financial instrument that it's always risky, of course. We have to always acknowledge that. It is equity investing on the part of these investors, so there's always risk associated with it. But we built a pretty strong body of evidence that, if you have a diversification of millions of microloans that's underlying these funds, then the odds of all of those going bad at once are pretty slim. So you have a little bit of resilience in that is appealing to them as well.
That's great. Thanks, Gary. So my questions so far have been about how you were able to convince well-established financial institutions make fundamental changes in how they conducted their loan business without supplying them with convincing evidence. I recall that a few years ago you took a sizable chunk of time off your daily grind. This was a sabbatical leave that you gave to yourself to do some deep thinking about what the future might hold for your company, what new directions it might take to achieve even more social improvements. Are any changes underway? Is it correct that I have increasingly seen two words in your literature? It used to be So now it is water and sanitation, whereas I think when you and I first talked about these things, you were in the water business.
Yeah.
The sanitation part of it?
No,
Explain that one.
It has been. No, it has been. I think it's not lost on this audience here that those two go hand in hand, and it's just a easier shorthand to say water.org as opposed to waterandsanitation.org. I don't even know if we could get the sanitation URL or not, but we got the water one. But it's always been water and sanitation. In fact, I think in some countries there's actually more toilet loans being made by our financial partners than water loans. So that's been a key part of it from the outset. The sabbatical, yes, it's been a little over 2 years ago. I've been doing this my whole life basically, and decided to kind of take a step back and do a sabbatical. Fortunately, that our board of directors looked favorably on that, and so I took 6 months off. Actually, I took 6 months off to not think about this. That's the crazy thing, just to kind of unplug, travel a little bit, a lot of body, mind, and spirit, a lot of meditation, silent meditation retreats that you put me on to, a lot of hiking and outdoor activities, and a lot of reading. But then coming back refreshed, I think that there was kind of the next reveal, if you will, that it seemed right for at the time, and that was the fact that we had created water.org as a philanthropic arm. So water.org can raise philanthropic capital. What it took was about $15 million in philanthropic capital to even launch WaterEquity as an asset manager. That's a pretty big leap. You're a water NGO, and you tell the world you're going to start an asset manager that's going to be of the ilk of Fidelity or Charles Schwab or others. You get a lot of people thinking you're crazy. But fortunately, we were able to use philanthropic capital to hire ahead of the curve. So before we even started into having the asset manager, we were able to go out and hire great people around the world who knew this business. We had the boots on the ground to be able to develop the project investment pipeline, the deal flow, and we hired really crack finance people who had already run other funds to come in and do that. And so by actually standing this up with a full complement of staff and team, that gave confidence to the Bank of Americas and other investors to kind of come in. And that's kind of another part of our story of how we work as a social enterprise. Normally if you're going to start a business like that, you go out, to Wall Street or Silicon Valley, Sand Hill Road, and say, look, we've got this concept. We need $15 million of capital. We'll give you a piece of the business. You'll own a piece of it and go forward. But we didn't want to give up a piece of the business. So we basically said, we'll use our own philanthropic capital as our venture capital to get it started. And now WaterEquity generates management fees of all the assets under management that completely cover its costs. And it will eventually start putting money back into the nonprofit side of the business. And so we had this model of saying, look, we can be our own kind of VC fund within a nonprofit organization to kind of go out and get this done. And that's what led to using that same model to launch WaterConnect. So WaterConnect is a project development company that develops water infrastructure projects in low and middle income countries now. So again, we're using philanthropic capital to seed that, to start it up. It has a little over a year under its belt, and it just closed on its first project development deal with a co-developer in Kenya for a public-private water partnership. So now we have the ability with WaterConnect to come at this problem from the top down with capital as well. So we have all of this money coming from the bottom up through household level lending and through some of these small and medium enterprises Now we have a project development company that can work with governments, work with other developers to develop projects that are bankable for infrastructure. And the reason why this all fits together is because oftentimes those types of projects get developed and no financing comes. And oftentimes you have financiers out there saying, oh, if we only had a bankable project to invest in, we have all this money, but there's no deal flow out there. What we're able to do is by putting WaterConnect together with WaterEquity, WaterConnect can develop projects that are designed to meet the investment criteria of WaterEquity. So that gives developers of these projects and governments more willingness to kind of jump in because there is potential for funding or co-funding there. And it also strengthens the investment pitch for WaterEquity investors to say, look, we have WaterConnect over here that is doing the high-risk development work of the project to get it to bankability, so we have much more likelihood that we're going to be able to deploy that capital. And so the idea is to put this all together under one roof so that we can kind of unclog this supply and demand issue that exists with larger scale infrastructure projects.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary. I'm sitting here listening to this and wondering if I were sitting out in the audience where you guys are, what would I be hearing Gary say? And it would not be sparkling clear. I don't think what you just described is a pretty complicated situation. Let me share with you a story that right before we began this session this afternoon, I was talking with some colleagues about an interesting episode, situation that I had just a couple of years before COVID hit. There were a group of 5 young women, undergraduate students at UNC. They had a leader who was born and raised, and family still lives in India. And they wanted to do some kind of a project in India. And they're searching around among professors at UNC trying to get a tutor or a leader, and weren't successful, and somehow or other they found me, and I say, oh, I'm really not interested in that. And they came up empty-headed, and I said, okay, let's find something to do. What do you want to do in India? Well, they didn't have a clue. So kind of the bottom line is, I said, okay, the bunch of you are ready. You think you can get support for this, of taking yourselves off and going to India. And I said, go to a slum and start off with some open, freewheeling discussions with residents in the slums about what are the problems, and then develop a questionnaire and collect detail in some detailed information to support what you're finding, and write your story. They're undergraduates, not very sophisticated. And so we spent a lot of time designing questionnaires and reading the literature and whatnot. And they take themselves off for about 3 weeks in India around Christmas time. Find this slum. The leader knew a place for them to go, probably had, I don't know, maybe 20, 30, 50,000 people in the slum. And shortly after arriving, they learned that the Indian government, for the previous maybe 6 or 7 or 8 years, had had a national project to end public defecation. Public defecation in India is a big deal. It's very, very common. So that's what they decide to tackle when they go into the slum. Well, the government announced that they had just completed this project of 6, 7, 8 years duration in which public defecation had stopped. That government had provided every household in the country with a latrine. And there was no more public defecation. I said, okay. When the students are there, they contact me, and I say, okay, dig into that. Is it true? Search around. And immediately they find that, yeah, public latrines were provided to every household. They were a bunch of boards that the owners had to put together, didn't know how to use because public defecation had been going on for years and years and years. And not one of the households in a fairly large sample of households they interviewed was using a latrine, and public defecation was alive and well. And they dug into why is this happening? You know, it's very different for men and for women. And they came back with just a marvelous array of findings. And COVID hit, and they were unable to publish their findings. But it was just an amazing piece of work. So water precedes sanitation. So the question I asked about your literature has both water and sanitation. Water always comes first, you know, and then the sanitation follows it. And that's an indicator that that people have taken a step up, even in the slums of developing countries. We're moving along here. Do you want to say something?
Well, I think that's an interesting background for what was happening in India, and just to mesh it up a little bit with what we do, we've been working in India, you know, as one of our earliest countries with water credit in the loan program, and what we found was that a lot of people who got the government subsidy for the toilet, it was so low, it really wasn't giving them the type of toilet that they wanted. They wanted, you know, more amenities with it. So they would actually go to our financial partners and take out like a top-up loan. So they would get a loan to put with their subsidy so that they could actually get a toilet that they valued and that they wanted. And so that was an interesting thing that we had done with the government. And a lot of the government subsidies for toilets there, you had to build the toilet first before you could get the subsidy. So that kind of puts people in a bind. So then again, they were able to avail themselves of loans to build the toilet, demonstrate that it was there, and then they could reclaim the subsidy.
Yeah, and that's what India did not do. Okay, this is the last item I have, Gary. I'd like to end with discussion of an uncommon and delicate subject, which is self-awareness. Your professional life has been complicated and at the same time very orderly. Your services to society have moved stepwise from helping small communities to huge groups of city dwellers improve their lives. Each of those steps has required self-awareness, deep reflection by you, initially on the past with its successes and failures, and more recently on how future service can be improved. The past is over. It's a matter of memory, and the future has not happened. That's a matter of imagination. Tell us how you have been able to move so successfully from one step to the next in what seems to me to be a very short time.
Curiosity. I think curiosity is the root of all of it for me. And there was a book about Da Vinci by Walter Isaacson that came out a few years ago, and that was the summation of Isaacson's, you know, explanation for what made Da Vinci Da Vinci, and that was curiosity. And I think that that is kind of what I guess I anchor in. I get curious about weird things, but then I also get curious about things that I'm passionate about, and kind of you start digging into things, and you see the layers of it, and then you begin to ask what if questions. And I think that's what all this whole story has been, is just a series of what if questions. What if people didn't have to walk to get water? What if they had access to a loan? What if a microfinance bank started making loans for this? What if we started an asset manager? And then picking apart the reasons for why not, and then you get to the new stage. So to me, it's I don't think it's I don't know if is it self-awareness, or is it just like what's in my DNA that just like looks at things and asks the what if questions. But then also, I'm pretty tenacious. It's that combined with I don't cultivate this actively, but it's definitely in me, always biting off more than I can chew. And I think that's an attribute that can have both positive and negative aspects. But if you bite off more than you can chew and you're tenacious at the same time, then it can work out. If you have a kernel of what is really a good idea, and there's been some bad ones too. No, don't get me wrong. We made some really big mistakes along the way. But if you have a kernel of an idea or an insight that you feel convinced is a value, and you pursue that, then I think that's what can really change things. And I think that the concept of where we're at now, I feel like we're just getting started. We have a lot more work to do to be able to get the real heavy investors of the world engaged in solving this crisis. But if you look at where we came from, a water NGO started, here in Chapel Hill back in 1990 with a bunch of graduate students, where we had a philosophy and approach of 100% philanthropy is going to need to solve this problem, because that's the only way. And you get it to the point where you now are actually helping, some of the poorest people in the world get access to water and providing a financial return to investors. All of a sudden, it doesn't seem so crazy that you can solve the crisis if you can just keep at it in ways that brings more capital into the system and continue to get it right. So to me, I don't feel, you've actually had a pretty strong influence on me in terms of self-awareness and meditation and things like that. But I feel like I'm not probably the best case study for self-awareness. To me, it just seems to happen and kind of be in my DNA to kind of keep doing it. And I'm saying a lot of I's here too. This is clearly an amazing partnership effort with all the people at water.org and WaterEquity and WaterConnect and all of these partners around the world, with Matt and, being able to, bring him in and his enormous commitment, which is incredible. Matt, in addition to all the time that he gives, he's the largest individual financial contributor to water.org. Tens of millions of dollars of his own money he's put into this as well. And so I don't know. I think it is this group effort and continuing to be as self-aware as possible and kind of keep plugging away at it. And hopefully there's enough underlying proof and demonstration and evidence that the markets will respond more, and we can connect more people, not just us. And it's trying to be a signal effect, right? So it would be great if the BlackRocks of the world opened their eyes to this investment potential and started putting money into it as well, and maybe that'll happen someday. And it is a lot of public-private partnerships that have to happen to make it go forward. But I do think where we came from to where we've gotten, it doesn't seem crazy that we can get that last little distance. And then just one aspect of this: if we had stuck with the kind of the philanthropy-led approach that we started with back in 1990, it would have taken us 600 years to reach the same number of people that we've reached by iterating. And you know, I think it was the early 2000s that we reached our first 1 million people with water. And you know, now we're reaching 1 million people about every 10 weeks through this network of financial partners around the world. So that evolution has been really important to helping us scale up.
Well, we're going to close. I'll just share with you folks a few thoughts going through my head. Your self-awareness was partly a gift, certainly. But it seems to me it was largely a matter of mental discipline, that you didn't multitask, that you slowed your life down, and you started thinking very carefully about different options and how to go about this business. Just think about what's happening with, let's say, the administration in Washington right now with deciding to tear down the East Wing. How much forethought went into that? So I think that I wouldn't belittle the notion of thinking very carefully about what you do. And when I introduced Gary, and I was standing at that podium over there, I finished my remark by making reference to non-dualistic thinking. Dualistic thinking is a matter of we're either doing this or we're doing that, okay? It's either this or it's that. But non-dualistic thinking is it's both this and that. And the both this and that I discern from Gary's work, which I think is almost unique in the world, Gary, so I don't want to embarrass you, but it seems to me that Gary in his work went to the lenders, and you were dealing early on with foundations. Well, foundations, they're looking for an annual return of 3-4% per year, 5% per year. And it seems to me, based on what I've read from your book and what I know about your work, was that you went to those guys and said, hey, instead of a 4% return, just squeeze out a tiny bit for me, 1%. And you guys will get your financial return from your 3%, and you'll also get a gigantic social return from the people whose lives you've improved. And that's what I would argue non-dualistic thinking is about. Okay.
Thanks. So I think we're going to take some questions now. Anybody can step up to the mic if you have any questions.
Thank you. It's very nice to see a professor so proud of his former student. Really nice. My name is Yogita Mumson. Gary, we've been on some panels together, but you may not remember. I'm with the World Bank Group. I'm at the Global, and we're meeting next week to talk about Mission Water, or in a couple of weeks. So we look forward to seeing potential partnership with you there. My question is, in your efforts, how often, if often, did you come across sort of policy, institutional, regulatory constraints that needed to be tackled for your work to have greater impact, sustainability, scale? And when you did, were you able to, who did you work with to address them?
Yeah, I mean, from the outset, we've never been an organization that sends expats overseas to kind of do this work. So we've always hired local nationals. And you know, whatever country we're in, we hire for the expertise that knows the policy environment, that knows how to work within the regulatory environment, who knows the financial system there. And so that, to me, that decision from the outset has really allowed us to ensure that any kind of way that we're entering a market, particularly with the financial institutions, we have on the ground local expertise there and knowledge. Before we were water.org, we were water partners. And that was before we did the merger with Matt's organization. And it was always about partnership with our local team, but also local organizations there. I think on the U.S. side of this, we've never had any money from USAID. So that policy or practical decision that we made years ago, I think, has left us in a pretty strong position now. And the reason that so much of what has been the USAID money has been really to be a contractor, to basically do this specific work in this specific country and get this done. And you can probably tell by now, after listening to me for 45 minutes, that we don't fit that mold. You don't go to USAID and say, look, we want to start up the world's first asset manager that focuses on water in low-income countries. Give us a $15 million grant. And so we've never really been a good fit with that because of the nature of who we are and our DNA. So.
Hi, my name is Carlos. I'm a student here, PhD here in the department. You mentioned about some ideas that didn't work. So I'm curious to learn which ideas or one idea that didn't work, what was the experience, what did you learn from that experience so we don't make the same mistake again? So what can you learn from that?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing that we learned is that there's never going to be enough philanthropy in the world to solve the water crisis. So it's like, okay, what does that mean to us? Because that's the only way anybody was figuring out how to solve the water crisis, at least from an NGO perspective. So that was one. The other was, we first piloted our first loan in Kenya, and what we did there, we were working with a local NGO that was in turn working to organize communities and respond to requests for grants to develop water projects. Those are usually like simple wells, borehole wells with an overhead tank and a small distribution system. And so this NGO had like these 3-ring binders that were just full of communities that wanted a grant to do their water project. And so this is where we kind of got into a what if question with this NGO. We said like, well, we only have so much money philanthropically, but if you wanted to structure a loan program with some of these communities, then we could bring in more capital. And so we made a loan to this NGO to then on-lend to these communities. And the project default rate was really, really high. And so that's where we learned that you can't turn an NGO into a microfinance bank. And it's like, okay, there's just so much more that needs to happen in terms of making these communities ready for investment, the technical assistance that they need, the training that they need, how do they work with the power company to get electricity. And so that was, we kind of skinned our knees on that one and then recognized, okay, let's work through existing financial networks to kind of reach these types of households and then eventually communities. So that was a big learning moment for us.
Hey Gary, it's Tanvi.
Tanvi, how you doing?
Good. It's good to see you. Quick question. So just watching this evolution of yours since Water Partners to today, how do you navigate local politics? How does your organization deal with local governments that maybe, have water running today, people have connected, and tomorrow the supply is dried out, so this poor lady who took the loan is still having to buy water. Like, how do you navigate with the local government units to make sure that, or do you remove yourself and you let the bank do it?
Yeah, I think we largely remove ourselves because what we're trying to do is work with existing institutions that are there. And in our case, it's largely financial institutions. Now, we do also work with governments. We've worked a lot with the government of India, with the Total Sanitation Project and the piped water systems, and working in collaboration with them to bring more capital into the system. So that's one way we do that. Again, because we have local staff who live there and work there in this sector forever, and we have good relationships with them. But it's really just about, it's not coming in with like really top-down solutions. So we're not, even though we are working with WaterConnect now to develop larger scale infrastructure projects, that has to be done in collaboration with the government and with local developers, public-private partnerships. So absolutely, that's the thing that we're doing. And again, trying to partner with local developers to co-develop so that we can draw on their expertise and we can bring what we bring. But I think the key to it is we're not so top down in like building water projects. We're just there to basically help people in poverty get access to solutions that are already there. There is already a grid in most major cities, and people need to get connected to it, but they can't afford the fees. We see a lot of opportunity in Peru because we are working with local financial institutions in the slums there to allow more people to hold up their hand and say, if there's a utility, we'll connect to it, because they had access to loans. That actually helped incentivize the utility to come into that neighborhood, because this neighborhood might have 80% of the people holding up their hands because they can get microloans, as opposed to the next neighborhood where they don't. So you just try to come in and again work within the slipstream of what's there, and help people get access to the financial tools to meet the needs that they see, as opposed to like we're coming in and doing a big water project with them.
Hi, Gary. My name is Stuart Coleman. I started a nonprofit in Hawaii called VI, Wastewater Alternatives and Innovations. I wanted to thank you for the great work that you've done, and kind of bring this. We're working as part of the wash sector in the United States for the 2 million people that don't have access to water and sanitation. Do you think this model, especially with the rise of AI and these data centers and crypto and just the incredible rise in water demand, do you think that this model would work here in the United States and other developed countries? And do you feel like this is a major crisis on the horizon?
Yeah, well, certainly, water consumption, water use of AI and data centers is challenging, and both in the U.S. and around the world. From our perspective, the way that we are kind of set up to work in emerging markets, it's a whole different set of expertise, I think. But the short answer is yes. I think it's, there's lots of community finance opportunities out there. I don't know what the federal government level now, if some of those are kind of drying up, but it's still kind of a crisis response thing in the U.S. We know that we have aging infrastructure. We know that it's underinvested in, and then every now and then it comes to the fore when you have something like Flint, Michigan, or Jackson, Mississippi, or whatever, where it becomes obvious and you throw a lot of money at it. So the fact is there are resources here to be able to do that. I think it's probably more of a policy kind of framework that needs to direct the capital into these areas. It's a political, having the backbone to stand up and say, yes, we are short billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars here. But we're also a wealthy country, and we can afford to pay for it.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for a very interesting discussion this afternoon. So your focus has been on water. That leaves the other side of the coin, shall we say, sanitation. Is it possible in your mind to actually come up with a similar financial model to address the sanitation issue, either in urban or rural areas?
Yeah, I think what we are trying to do is to unleash this demand from the bottom up, and certainly the kind of household financial calculus of sanitation doesn't follow the water one, where it is, income enhancing or saving people money. But there's obviously a huge demand out there for sanitation from a perspective of privacy, from a perspective of safety. And so we do still see large percentages of these household level loans, and we've reached 70 million people, 80 million people now with that. A large percentage of those have been for sanitation loans. And again, it might not be a financial decision, it might be other factors that people still value and are willing to take loans for a household level toilet and a septic system and things like that. So it definitely is there. As we look at infrastructure projects, we're also looking at developing and investing in wastewater treatment infrastructure, because what we see is such a low percentage of wastewater, both municipal and industrial, is treated in developing countries. Where does that end up? Where's the downstream? The downstream is always going to be the poorest neighborhoods. And so we see real benefit in coming in and investing in those types of infrastructure projects and developing those as well, because the knock-on benefit is going to accrue to some of the poor neighborhoods. You could argue that those projects should be built anyway because they shouldn't be discharging, but frankly the capital is not there. And if we can work with the private sector, polluters with that on that as well, we will. And the reason we'll do that is because of the downstream effects, but also as we do those projects, we will be able to collect management fees and success fees for developing those, and we can actually generate revenue to feed back into the overall social enterprise of water.org.
Thank you.
Hi, Gary. I'm Katie Rich with Aqua Research. And your professor said he asked you a question during your thesis about how your business was going to stand out and be different. And I'm really curious how you answered that question decades ago before all these years of experience.
It's a great question, which an answer to which has long since been eclipsed. But in the early days of this, before I came back to do my graduate work, I was working for Catholic Relief Services in New York, and had been working in the sector for a while, and found that there was a high percentage of water projects around the world that were failing. And so the question is, how were we going to be different in terms of ensuring that our projects were going to succeed? And a couple of things that I spoke about at that time is like, we're not going to be the engineers and the designers on the projects. We're going to work exclusively through local water NGOs who are the closest to the communities. That's where the name Water Partners came from initially, is that our job wasn't going to be to go build water projects. Our job was going to be able to go and locate and screen and vet the best of the local NGOs that were doing that work in country, and then provide them the financial assistance they needed to go do more projects, and then follow up on that with monitoring and evaluation. So at that point, when we started this, we were only accepting about 1 out of every 20 NGOs that we evaluated. And this was in Latin America at first. So that was kind of how we answered the question back then. We're going to kind of apply this more rigorous kind of analytical engineering analysis to the number of partners that we're working with, and then monitor and follow up.
Thank you.
My name is Jonah Kudago. Thank you very much for the information you've shared with us. This is very impressive, especially your professor giving you all this praise. I don't know what to say again. I think your work has been going on for a very long time, and I just wanted to find out if you have worked in different regions where disaster is prone, whether it has impacted your work in any way that you want to share with us so that we can know the differences in working in a more stable environment versus where disasters are prone. And then also a personal question. Where do you see personal insurance schemes coming into play with what you are doing? Thank you.
I'm sorry, what the last part, what personal question? What?
Insurance, I mean the private sector, like insurance companies. Where do you see them fitting in what you are doing?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's, I guess, two answers to that first part, and that is the disaster response. We've never been an organization that does that. We feel like there are so many other organizations out there that are better positioned to respond in those situations, and you can tell by the nature of our model, which is really a demand-driven, finance-oriented model. It's much more towards long-term. And then, but what we also see is the greatest disaster and the greatest risk is associated with climate change. And we know that the people who have the most tenuous access to water now, the poorest, are going to be disproportionately impacted in that way. And so we look at the climate lens of this as well as when we work with our local partners and when we look at infrastructure projects, is how do we build in more kind of adaptation and particularly resilience. And I think that's key to what we're doing. And I think it our model complements that. I was in Indonesia recently, and there were people there whose wells were drying up because of drought conditions. And so what we see is like, okay, well, the fact that we have financial partners there, that gives them some resilience in terms of being able to get access to financing to either sink the wells deeper or to develop some other type of water solution. So what we see by creating a whole ecosystem of finance for water and sanitation that kind of surrounds these communities, it actually gives them more resilience in terms of shocks that might come to their current water and sanitation supply solutions. So that's how we see the model actually looking at this not as an acute situation like a hurricane in Jamaica and responding to that, but more how do we long-term build in resilience.
The second one? Oh, that one is the...
Oh, about insurance. Yeah, a lot of microfinance institutions that we work with also do microinsurance. I haven't seen it applied to water and sanitation at this point. And so it's a good question because obviously the environmental risk associated with people's water solutions might be insurable. It's good food for thought.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey Gary, I'm Luke Pinio. I'm with WaterConnect, and I'm curious on the investment side. I'm sure you've considered it. So, what has your thought been around opening up to more of a retail investor model and meeting, your more common at-home investor with the opportunity to match the need with modest returns?
Yeah, that's prescient. That's what we're working on right now, actually. We've had, up to this point, what are called closed-end funds that have 7-year commitments, and it's only for accredited investors. And we've just launched what's called our Everspring Fund, which is a perpetual fund that allows people to come in at lower levels, and it offers greater liquidity to them as well. So we've seen a lot of demand on the part of investors for something that isn't such a long-term lockup. That hasn't gotten down to the retail level yet, but it's getting closer, and that's something that we've been kind of working on in the background for a while. How can we use a platform, like a Venmo or something like that allows people to kind of put their capital to work while it's sitting around in their account? And there's a whole different set of regulatory things that go along with that we're kind of working on. But that would be, I would love that. It really kind of completes the whole circle, right? Because right now, if you want to, as an individual, if you want to respond to this crisis, you can write us a check at water.org, and yeah, we'll use that philanthropy to scale up the model and get more people. But it would be a really interesting concept to say, and you could make a loan, a la Kiva to a certain extent. But without so much, it's really hard to do that one-to-one. We kind of saw that from the outset. It was going to be really hard to connect you to that woman in India who got that toilet. That's a logistics nightmare, but to be able to create a pool that you can put money into that kind of comes out the other side, that's something that we're looking at.
Hi, Gary. Thank you. I'm Christy Stickney with Vision Fund, and we partnered with you in many different countries. Much of the talk in World Vision and what I've been hearing the last day and a half has been around water service providers. So a step up from microfinance in the rural communities, hard to access, often not quite bankable. And just wanted to ask if you all have had any breakthroughs lending into that sector.
So I know some of the financial partners that we've worked with at the household level loans, they've started to make loans at larger ticket sizes, $10,000, $15,000. I know, for instance, in Kenya, Family Bank has been doing this, and they've been making loans to small rural utilities, community operated utilities. So that is starting to happen more. That's been more organic than it has been us kind of developing a specific initiative in those areas. But it just speaks to, like, once you can see this demand from the bottom up, that it's there. You see these financial institutions who want to make money at doing this, developing those types of products. I know we promised that we would be out of here by 3 o'clock, and we've already violated that. Sorry.
Hold a plug.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking the Gary White and Don Loria. And they'll be around, available for questions, right, for a little bit. Sure. We're starting a coffee break, so enjoy that, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.